For me personally, it hit me at just the right time. Was when I was getting ready to leave home and getting ready to move from a smaller town to the larger world with the common uncertainties that everybody has when they leave home. What am I going to do with my life? How am I going to meet people? How am I expected to earn a living? And with perspective and looking back, you realize that those fears were surmountable, but at the time, they're very scary. And the song just struck me. Just how does it feel? And I was feeling it at the time. I was insecure. I was scared. I was nervous. To be without a home, no direction home, a complete unknown going out in the world. I mean, it was like it was written for me in the moment, and it just came through the stereo and just into my core. And it was what I was feeling and that couldn't um, translate into words, and it just was the most powerful moment I've ever had with music. And the beautiful thing about the song is I get that feeling every time I hear it. It's still so fresh. It never gets old. It never feels dated. It feels as crisp and fresh every time I listen to it as it did the first time. And I heard a jingle on the radio that, it was An Evening with Bob Dylan, and they had him playing Mr. Tambourine Man snippets, and then the Joker Man chorus, and coming to the Sioux City Auditorium, Memorial Auditorium. And it was like, wow. I told my buddy Sam, I'm like, we got to go to this thing and see it. And he's like, yeah, let's do it. And I went. I was very excited to go. No idea of what to expect. I was probably still thinking, yeah, he's going to sound just like the songs do on the CDs a little bit, but I'd also heard him vary from CD to CD, so I wasn't completely shocked or um, disappointed at all. I thought the music was great, and um, you know any concert when you're that age is fantastic. But he came out, and he starts out with Joker Man, which is one of my favorites. At the time, I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm sure he's going to play all my favorites. I realize now, like, wow, I was pretty fortunate to hear Joker Man as my first live Bob Dylan song. And it was a really special night. I remember sitting there, and it was the um, tour where he was finishing most of his songs with about a 10-minute solo. Or a musical prelude or conclusion to the song. I'm not using the right musical terms, but you'd go through the verses and then they would just jam for a while, about an extra 5 or 10 minutes per song. So
Right.
that
It's All
was
Over Now, Baby Blue would be 9 minutes or something.
exactly, yeah. And it was a good band. It was Bucky Baxter and Tony Garnett and J.J. Jackson, Winston Watson was the drummer. So it was a good lineup. I think when I look back at the net, I think 94 was really when he started to turn it on, and the net really became, you know, that ascension to its peak. I don't know whatever people consider his peak to be, but definitely it was a rising action from 94 to 2002. And I think those were the shows that it really, really got good. I think what really cemented that feeling for me was actually a bootleg CD I bought in Iowa City. There was an old shop down there in the Ped Mall. I think it's long gone. But I went in there to buy Guitars Kissing and the Contemporary Fix when that came out. It was before the Bootleg Series 4 and 5 came out with the 66 live. And I think the rumor was that they had mixed it. Bob didn't like the mix, but then that mix leaked out as Guitars Kissing and the Contemporary Fix. So I went out to get that. I bought that, and then you get all these random bootleg titles that are out there. You have no idea what the quality is going to be, or so you just look at the back, you look at the songs. And I picked one up from 1992. It was a San Jose Revisited CD. And Drifter's Escape most of the time, Idiot Wind, which is one of my favorite songs. And I love the 92 shows. It might be my favorite year of the net, just because of the phrasing and how he mixed it up, each and every song. Little Moses was on there as well, a great song. And I listened to that CD, and it's just a masterworks in phrasing and holding the audience in suspense from song to song. And and I just remember it's one of my favorite Boots CDs, and that really kind of opened up the possibilities to me that any live show that he does is worth examining, because you could have moments like this. And really, I can't remember a single concert I've gone to where I didn't have that feeling of just like, wow, he really turned that phrase, or he really changed that up and made the whole admission price worth it right there. It's my best concert moment. I finally got good seats. And it was, for me, it was a step, because I'd already seen him a few weeks earlier. And then a friend of mine said, well, he's playing, and I think we went to Mankato. And then the week later he was in Davenport. And I'm like, well, I just saw him, but maybe I could go see him again because it was so good. And so I, was feeling a little bit like, am I developing a bad habit here? Just, am I going to be, quitting everything and traveling with him, which in hindsight I should have done, but I didn't. Um, but yeah, we had good seats, and he starts in Shelter from the Storm, which is another great song. And one I'd not heard before. So I was just staring at him the whole time. And then, yeah, he came in a little hilltop village, and he just looked right at me and just sang the line. And it did just freeze me. And I just remember just, I don't know, like a tractor beam or something. I was just sitting there and singing. And then he just, breaks eye contact and probably looked at somebody else and gave them the same effect. And what I remember about it was revisiting that feeling then when he accepted his Grammy Award, and he was talking about seeing Buddy Holly up in the Duluth Armory, and Buddy Holly making eye contact with him. And he goes on to say he wasn't sure like if Buddy Holly's spirit was there with him when they were making Time Out of Mind, but I just thought that was kind of an interesting, kind of a closing of the circle for me. I mean, it's something that I could share with him, something that he himself felt with one of his idols and appreciated. And it made me feel good to know that, for him, he felt that as a kid when he was my age, and then he grew up, fulfilled his dream, and now he's inspiring other people and doing that. So who knows? Maybe someday I'll find out that I looked at somebody and it made a difference in their world too. We'll see. Like, there's still a lot of little boy in Bob Dylan, and thank God for that. For all of us growing up to be men, you want to keep a little bit of that little boy in you, and have people that can appreciate it. But it's a funny song. The phrasing's amazing on it, and yeah, I do naturally and appreciate the depth and the poetry, and the magnitude of some of his well-known works, and it's very, very well deserved credit that he gets for those masterpieces. But he also has a lot of lines in a lot of songs that they're just hilarious, and then songs that are funny, and songs that aren't meant to be taken seriously, but are meant to be very fun. And I think another way you can see that is in some of the songs that he chooses to cover as well. What does he pick out when he wants to play something, maybe that isn't his, but wants to put across a certain mood, like Red Cadillac and Black Mustache. That song's hilarious, and he does such a great job with that. And, it's not Tambourine Man or, It's All Right Ma, but it's not supposed to be, it's okay to mix that up. I think you and I coming from the Midwest, Iowa's not Minnesota, and there's some differences to be sure. But, I think we share a lot of Midwestern values and outlooks and mechanisms and things like that. And humor is a big part of coping in the Midwest. And it's how people, um, you know, communicate and empathize and persevere is through humor. We have all four seasons here. You have to be resilient. You have to be dexterous, and you have to have your eye on the next season that's coming to get through the one you're in. And Bob Dylan does that, and he realizes that humor is one of the ways that people can communally look forward and stick together in the present. And that comes through in his songs, I think, a lot. There are people from different parts of the world that enjoy Bob Dylan's music. I'm sure the thing that comes across most directly is the poetics. But the closer you get to that Midwestern understanding that you and I were just kind of born with, the more you can appreciate the subtleness and the jabs or the humor in some of the songs. Just trying to think of some examples, but his silly jokes that he was giving, on the stage in the late 90s and early 2000s about, dating a tennis player and running into problems because love means nothing to those people, or, having a girlfriend who was so conceited, he used to call her Mimi. That's, that's just great. Bob was doing dad jokes before dad jokes became a thing. His ability to create a mood where people are hanging on the next word and then relieve that tension with humor is pretty unique. You don't see that. I can't. What other musicians are out there right now that you would describe as, humorous in their work, but also at the same time being taken seriously?
Yeah, and
You have one or the other. Like your Weird Al Yankovic,
right.
humorous, but people don't take him seriously. And then you
Yeah.
got someone like Bruce Springsteen, who's taken very seriously, but not really cited for the humor in his songs. So Bob kind of, again, his own long and narrow way. It's his own path that he's kind of forged, and he invented his lane, I guess. No one's ever going
Right.
to ask him to stay in it because he's invented his own lane. As I've gotten older and look back, I really, really think the songs themselves are so well written. When the night comes falling from the sky, the uh, the poetry of that song is just amazing. And people have a really tough time, I think, when I read different message boards or different discussions about Bob Dylan's work, and not just Bob Dylan's work, but the work of other artists like Bruce Springsteen as well. I'll see things like that terrible 80s production or that awful 80s drum sound or the synthesizer. And perhaps it's because I grew up in that. I don't hate that effect as much as other people who grew up in the 60s or 70s. I mean, to me, the disco sounds of the 70s is as distinctive as the sound of the 80s with the synthesizer. So perhaps that's something I'm able to get through better than others. But when I look back at his songs, I think the songs are fantastic. But maybe the other thing that I'm really attracted to is that he left a lot of the best songs off of his 80 albums. And when I was reading Behind the Shades by Clinton Halen, I just had the official output at the time. He's talking about all these great songs from bootlegs he's listened to that didn't show up. And I think what really, another milestone in my fandom was when the bootleg series 1 through 3 came out. And I heard some of these things. Foot of Pride just blew me away. I mean, it's got to be in my top. It's in my top 5, if not probably my second favorite song. But I just think that song is unbelievable. And he left that off an album. Blind Willie McTell, didn't make an album. So you said the top 10 songs of the 80s out of anybody were by Bob Dylan. And I'd almost one up you. And I would say that it's his least recognized decade. And I would say if I could pick 10 songs he left off of his albums, I could put together a greatest hits compilation that would blow away any other artist's greatest hits compilation. And I would be able to defend that and die on that hill. But you're talking about Caribbean Wind and Foot of Pride, Blind Willie McTell. I mean, you look at like New Danville Girl was left off originally. I know it showed up later, but Born in Time from the Oh Mercy sessions in that version, I think is just a masterpiece. I think he was at his peak then in terms of mastery of his songwriting. If you look at Joker Man, that is definitely a song. It's probably in my mind second to Mr. Tambourine Man in terms of Bob Dylan songs that you could look at on paper and say this is an award-winning poem. It's poetic. The structure of the song, the rhyme scheme, the meter, it's just amazing. Regardless of the vocal performance that he gives, which is amazing if you just look at it on paper, that's not something that you see anywhere in the music world. And I'm not the most well-read person in the poetry world, but I think you'd probably be challenged to find a lot of poets who could sit down and write something like that. And so he was really hitting it all strides. I don't mind the production on some of the songs, but just the post-apocalyptic coming out of the, the 70s religious period where he was very direct with his faith. And there's a little more ambiguity in terms of what's going on. Is the faith still there? Is there discouragement with organized religion versus his faith? He had an interview later where he talked about religion. I can't remember exactly what he was saying, but I think it was challenges the dignity of faith when you talk about religion. And, so he makes a very clear distinction between the two, and he kind of has that separation with organized religion. So you've got all that stuff going there, whatever in his personal life was going on. Um, I look at my age right now, I'm in my mid 40s, which is where Bob was in the 80s. So again, trying to relate to what was going on in his mind. He's um, not heralded as much as he was. He still thinks he's got it. He's writing great songs on paper. He's frustrated because the sound of these songs isn't resonating with the music industry at the time. He's reaching out for help from people who are, quote unquote, the experts in the 80s sound. I'm sure he's not liking the results. He's getting, worse reviews than he's had in the past. And he's struggling with the stuff that normal middle-aged men deal with. He's maybe no longer at the top, maybe he's on the way down, and that's a struggle for all of us. And he's no different in that regard. But he's still putting out what he thinks are good songs, frustrated with getting them across the way he was. Trying to mix it up. Should I have the female backup singers? Should I get a big rock and roll band to back me? Tom Petty, Grateful Dead. Try tour with, Mick Taylor and Steve Ripley, go to Europe. I'll even bring Joan Baez back on to see if we can rekindle some of the magic from the 60s. So he's still experimenting, still wanting it. And so I relate to some of the things that he was personally going through at the time, and just am amazed at the songs that he created. I don't think that anybody else, when you look back at the 80s, was writing songs like that. So when Dylan came up, people weren't making a living off of their recorded music as much. They really made a lot of their money through tours. So it was just the nature of the industry, and they were working musicians. If you look at some of the old photos, you're like, why is Bob in 1966 playing in what looks like a high school auditorium? And the answer is that that's where the work was. That was his job. He couldn't just cut a song, sit back, have all the royalties come in, or all the sponsorships, all the social media stuff today. And it's interesting, the music industry kind of flipped between, making money on tours, and all of a sudden, artists were able just to create these blockbuster albums, maybe support it with a small tour, but they made enough money from these album sales and contract deals that they really didn't have to tour. And there was a lesser degree of instrumentation on some of these records as the technology started to change music. So people didn't have to really live as a working musician. They could be recording artists and make their living. Well, then when Napster came along, and they started cutting out, the sales of things in Spotify, and now you get David Crosby complaining about the low royalty rates for songs on Spotify. It's the working musicians like Bob Dylan, like Bruce Springsteen, who've been able to go through all of those different things, and they never did it for money. They did it because they loved the music, but they were never afraid of the work of being a working musician. And so Bob did that in the 60s. He did it in the 70s. He kept working in the 80s, in the 90s. Didn't matter to him, if the money was coming in through gate receipts or through record sales or whatever. He sees himself as a working musician. And I think that's incredibly inspiring, because he's really at the pinnacle. He could think highly of himself to his own detriment, but I think he is pretty humble. I think he's proud of himself, and he knows that he's good. But I also think that he has some of that Midwestern humility, and understands that he's a working musician, and he's there to, to make a living every night.
Right.
It gets intractable from my life when I look back. Ever since I started listening to him, it's just always been with me. I listen to his music every day. When I'm not listening to it out loud, I'm listening to it in my head. the variety, I think, is incredible. His recent song, "I Contain Multitudes," that's so true. I mean, he's such a varied person. Country music, I love country music. I love rock and roll. I love the singer-songwriter ethos. I love the poetic aspect of it. But he's also somebody who's lived during a very interesting time. He was part of the 60s. I mean, a big part of the 60s, and he was, present throughout all these other times in our life. And you look back, he was overlaying those historical events with very poignant commentary through his songs, a lot of times 3 to 5 years in advance of the events. And I just think that's incredible. And what I've really come to appreciate over time as I've gotten older and more mature is just how good he is at taking in all of the external stimulus and influence in his environment and through history, and accumulating all of this knowledge and bringing it in and reworking it and bringing something back out that is familiar yet completely unique and right on the point. Like he said, it doesn't pussyfoot around. It just smacks you right across the face, and this is what it is. And he delivers in such an enjoyable way for me, that it's just incomparable, to anybody else. And it's hard to really understand how someone's capable of doing this, but just I'm very thankful that he does, and he's been around doing it for so long. Yeah, and I think that's probably the number one thing about him that's most misunderstood by the general public is he's not, moved by divine guidance. He's not a guru. He's not a psychic or someone who can predict the future. And it's not drugs that are producing these works. It's just vulgar to think so, as he once said. But really, it's somebody who's just paying attention and curious to the world around him and who cares about it, and puts it all together. And then on top of that, works really hard at his craft, and that's not as sexy as somebody who just shows up and has these mystical powers and is in touch with the cosmos or whatever, like people thought in the 60s and the psychedelia. But like you said, it's really more impressive when you think how hard it would be to do this, and that he's done this for so long and at such a high level. He really deserves a lot of appreciation for that. One of my favorite quotes that he gave was when he said, what more can you do for somebody than inspire them? And I think that's what a great lesson that is, as a teacher, as a parent, as a friend, just as a person on the planet along with everybody else. What more could you possibly do for someone than inspire them and encourage their own potential to do great things in their own life? And he's done that for millions of people, and that's just incredible.